On a quiet Friday evening in Alexandria, Virginia, Marcus Johnson guided his unmarked black Audi along the tree-lined streets of Belhaven, an affluent neighborhood where mansions stood like silent sentinels behind manicured lawns. At 42, Marcus had spent the last 15 years as a CIA operative, specializing in domestic counterintelligence operations. Tonight, he was wrapping up a routine surveillance assignment, Sidon's in the area. The autumn air was crisp, and street lights cast long shadows across the pavement. Marcus checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. His mind was already on the detailed report he needed to file before heading home to his wife and daughter. The dashboard computer quietly recorded everything, a standard security measure for field operatives, though Marcus never expected it would become crucial evidence in the events about to unfold. Through his rearview mirror, Marcus noticed the distinctive headlights of a police cruiser following him. Years of training had taught him to remain calm in any situation, but something about this patrol car's behavior seemed off. It had been tailing him for the past 3 blocks, keeping a consistent distance without any apparent cause for suspicion. The red and blue lights suddenly flashed to life, accompanied by a short burst of siren. Marcus sighed, already knowing what this was about. It wasn't his first experience with racial profiling, even in his expensive car and tailored suit. He pulled over smoothly, following protocol to the letter. Hands visible on the steering wheel, interior light on, engine off. 2 officers approached his vehicle, one on each side. Their flashlights swept across his car's interior, the beams lingering longer than necessary. The officer at his window, whose nameplate read Sullivan, was a stocky man in his mid-30s with close-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes. His partner, Barrett, was taller and thinner, with a face that seemed permanently set in a suspicious scowl. "License and registration," Sullivan barked, his tone already hostile. Marcus noticed the officer's hand resting on his holstered weapon, a supple but clear intimidation tactic. "Of course, officer," Marcus replied calmly, reaching slowly for his credentials. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "Your vehicle matches the description of one involved in a home invasion earlier this evening. Where are you coming from?" Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, though his instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. He'd been monitoring police channels all evening as part of his operation. There hadn't been any reported home invasions in the area. "I'm coming from work," Marcus answered truthfully, handing over his license and registration. He debated showing his CIA credentials but decided against it. Years of experience had taught him to keep his cover intact unless absolutely necessary. Officer Barrett was now circling the car, his flashlight beam dancing across the windows and trunk. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Sullivan commanded, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Marcus complied, moving deliberately and keeping his hands visible. As he stood beside his car, the cool night air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and approaching rain. Sullivan directed him to stand by the front of the police cruiser while Barrett began searching his vehicle. Through the reflection in his car's windows, Marcus could see Barrett's methodical movements, but something caught his attention, a slight motion that seemed out of place. Thanks to his training, he recognized what was happening. Barrett was planting evidence in his car. The dashboard camera continued recording silently, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Marcus remained outwardly calm, but his mind was already racing through scenarios and protocols. He knew that any sudden movements or protests would only escalate the situation. These officers had no idea who they were dealing with, and for now, that was an advantage he needed to maintain. Well, what do we have here?" Barrett's voice carried a note of theatrical triumph as he emerged from the car, holding up a small jewelry bag that Marcus knew with absolute certainty hadn't been there before. Sullivan's smile was cold as he reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back, sir. You're under arrest for possession of stolen property." As the cool metal closed around his wrists, Marcus remained silent. The dashboard camera had captured everything: the illegal search, the planted evidence, every moment of this orchestrated arrest. What these officers didn't realize was that they had just walked into a situation far bigger than their usual racial profiling scheme. They had unwittingly targeted a CIA operative, and their actions were about to have consequences they couldn't imagine. The fluorescent lights of the Alexandria Police Department's booking area cast harsh shadows as Officers Sullivan and Barrett processed Marcus Johnson. The clock on the wall read 10:30 p.m., but time seemed to move differently within these sterile walls. Marcus observed everything with the calculated precision of his CIA training, mentally recording each detail and procedural violation. "Empty your pockets," Sullivan commanded, dropping an evidence bag on the metal processing table. His demeanor had grown increasingly smug since the arrest, clearly believing he had caught a wealthy criminal in the act. Marcus complied silently, placing his wallet, keys, and phone into the bag. He purposely left his hidden CIA-issued emergency beacon untouched in his jacket's secret compartment. Barrett was busy filling out paperwork, occasionally glancing up with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Looks like your fancy car and expensive suit couldn't keep you out of trouble this time," he remarked, his pen scratching against the forms. "It's always the ones who think they're above the law that fall the hardest." The booking officer, a younger man named Thompson, looked uncomfortable with the situation. He had been watching the interaction with growing unease, especially noting how Marcus carried himself, calm, composed, and oddly confident for someone facing serious charges. "Sir, I need your fingerprints," Thompson said, gesturing to the digital scanner. As Marcus pressed each finger to the glass, he knew the system would soon flag his prints. All CIA operatives had specially coded markers in federal databases that would alert his superiors. It was only a matter of time. In the next room, Marcus could hear Sullivan and Barrett laughing while they filled out their arrest report. Through the partially open door, the conversation drifted in. "Did you see his face when you found the jewelry?" Sullivan chuckled. "These people think they can get away with anything in this neighborhood." "Yeah, another successful arrest for the record books," Barrett replied. "The chief will be happy. That's the third one this month we've caught in Belhaven." Marcus's keen ears picked up every word, each statement adding to the growing evidence of their misconduct. What they didn't realize was that their conversation was being captured by his activated emergency beacon, transmitting everything to CIA headquarters. The holding cell they placed him in was cold and bare, with only a metal bench bolted to the wall. Marcus sat quietly, appearing defeated to anyone watching through the surveillance cameras. In reality, his mind was working through multiple scenarios, analyzing potential outcomes and planning his next moves. Around midnight, his patience was rewarded. Thompson approached the cell, his face pale. "Sir, there seems to be some kind of problem with your fingerprint results," he said nervously. "I've got federal agencies calling, and—" Before he could finish, the station's front doors burst open. Director Sarah Chen strode in, flanked by two senior CIA agents. Her presence commanded immediate attention, her tailored suit and stern expression marking her as someone with serious authority. "I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately," she announced to the desk sergeant, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And officers Sullivan and Barrett need to be present as well." The station erupted into controlled chaos. Sullivan and Barrett were called back from patrol, looking confused and slightly annoyed at being summoned. The night shift captain, Howard Mitchell, emerged from his office, his face showing concern at the unexpected federal presence. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Mitchell asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. Director Chen's response was ice cold. "You have one of my agents in custody. An agent who was conducting a sanctioned operation when your officers decided to engage in what appears to be a racially motivated false arrest." The color drained from Sullivan and Barrett's faces as realization began to dawn. Their confident smirks disappeared, replaced by growing fear as they watched their carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "Release him immediately," Chen commanded, handing over federal documentation that confirmed Marcus's identity and status. As Thompson hurried to unlock the cell, Marcus emerged with dignity intact. He straightened his jacket and nodded to Director Chen, maintaining his professional composure despite the situation. The officers who had arrested him now stood frozen, understanding that their routine harassment of a black motorist had just become a federal case with implications they couldn't begin to imagine. "Officers Sullivan and Barrett," Chen announced, her voice carrying through the now silent station, "I suggest you contact your union representatives. You'll need them for what's coming next." The following morning, Marcus Johnson sat in Director Sarah Chen's secure office at CIA headquarters in Langley. Sunlight streamed through bulletproof windows as they reviewed the footage from his vehicle's surveillance system on a large monitor. The video clearly showed Officer Barrett planting evidence, while synchronized audio P. "We got them," Chen said, pausing the footage. "But I want more than just these two officers. This pattern suggests department-wide problems." She turned to Marcus, who was sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "That's why we're not moving immediately. We need to dig deeper." Marcus nodded, understanding the strategy. "You want to use this to expose the entire corrupt system." "Exactly," Chen replied, pulling up a file on her computer. "Our analysts have been reviewing arrest records from the Alexandria PD for the past 5 years. The racial disparity in their traffic stops and arrests is staggering, but proving systemic discrimination requires more than statistics." The office door opened, and Special Agent Tom Rodriguez entered, carrying a thick folder. As the CIA's liaison with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, his involvement signaled the seriousness of the operation. "We've identified 15 cases similar to yours in the past year alone," Rodriguez reported, spreading photographs across Chen's desk. "All involving the same 2 officers, all targeting black professionals in upscale neighborhoods, and all resulting in suspicious evidence discoveries." Marcus leaned forward, examining the photos. Each showed a different arrest, but the pattern was unmistakable. "They've been doing this for years," he observed. "Getting bolder each time because nobody caught them." "Until now," Chen added. "We've contacted internal affairs, but we're keeping your CIA connection quiet for the moment. As far as they know, you're just another victim who happened to have unusually good surveillance equipment in his car." Rodriguez pulled out another document. "The DA's office is proceeding with charges against you, Marcus. They're pushing for a quick preliminary hearing, which plays perfectly into our plan." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. By allowing the case to proceed, they would give Sullivan and Barrett enough rope to hang themselves. Once they testified under oath about finding evidence in Marcus's car, the revelation of his true identity and the surveillance footage would be devastating. "What about the other victims?" Marcus asked, thinking about the lives these officers had damaged. Chen smiled. "That's where this gets interesting. While we build our case, we've had a team quietly contacting each previous victim. They're all willing to testify about their experiences. Some even had partial recordings or witness accounts that never made it into official reports." The meeting was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing. It was a local news alert. His arrest was making headlines. "Successful businessman arrested in Belhaven burglary ring." The accompanying photo showed him being led into the police station, with Sullivan and Barrett prominently featured, looking proud of their arrest. "They're playing right into our hands," Rodriguez observed. "The more publicity they generate, the bigger the impact when the truth comes out." Jen pulled up another file on her screen. "We've also discovered some interesting financial irregularities. Several valuable items from previous arrests have disappeared from the evidence room. The paperwork was handled exclusively by Sullivan and Barrett." "They're not just profiling," Marcus concluded. "They're running a theft ring using their badges as cover." The pieces were falling into place. What had started as a case of racial profiling was unveiling a deeper conspiracy within the department. The CIA's involvement would remain classified, but the evidence they were gathering would be handed over to federal prosecutors, ensuring the case would be handled outside local jurisdiction. "Your preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week," Chen informed Marcus. "Until then, maintain your cover. Let them think they've got an easy conviction. Rodriguez will be your attorney, posing as a public defender." Marcus stood, straightening his suit, and the other officers who knew about this but said nothing. "We're building cases against them too," Rodriguez assured him. "By the time this is over, the entire department will be cleaned out." As Marcus left the office, he felt a mix of anticipation and responsibility. What happened to him was about to become a catalyst for exposing years of systemic abuse. The officers who thought they were framing an ordinary citizen had unknowingly set in motion their own downfall, and the impact would reach far beyond their badges. Chen watched him go, then turned to Rodriguez. "Make sure everything is perfect. When this explodes in court, I want it to be nuclear." The Alexandria Times headline blared across local newsstands. "Local police crack down on high-end burglary ring." The story dominated local media, with officers Sullivan and Barrett becoming overnight celebrities in law enforcement circles. Television stations ran their interviews on constant rotation, showing the officers standing proudly in their pressed uniforms. It was just solid police work, Officer Sullivan told Channel 7 News. 8. Officer Barrett nodded beside him, adding, "The suspect tried to blend in with expensive clothes and a luxury vehicle, but you can't fool good police instincts. We're trained to spot suspicious behavior." Inside his home office, Marcus Johnson watched these interviews with measured amusement. His CIA training had taught him the value of letting opponents believe they held the upper hand. Each time the officers appeared on television, they dug themselves deeper into what would become their own professional graves. His phone buzzed with a text from Director Chen. "They're scheduled for another interview tomorrow. Keep watching." The media frenzy had taken an ugly turn. Local talk radio hosts discussed the case with thinly veiled racial undertones, praising the officers for cleaning up the affluent neighborhoods. Comment sections on news websites filled with prejudiced assumptions about Marcus's guilt, despite no evidence being presented beyond the officer's claims. "Look at this," Marcus's wife Angela said, showing him her tablet. A local blog had published his booking photo alongside a lengthy article questioning how a black man could afford to live in their neighborhood. The comments section was a cesspool of racist speculation. "They're playing right into our hands," Marcus replied calmly, squeezing her hand. "Every article, every interview, every comment, it's all evidence of the systemic problems we're about to expose." Meanwhile, at the Alexandria Police Department, Sullivan and Barrett had become department heroes. Other officers bought them coffee, clapped them on the back, and asked for advice on spotting suspicious characters in wealthy areas. The chief had even recommended them for commendations. What no one noticed was the quiet presence of undercover FBI agents, posted as administrative staff, documenting every conversation and noting which officers expressed support for the discriminatory practices. The internal investigation was growing wider by the day. Local community leaders began organizing protests outside the police station, demanding accountability and an end to racial profiling. The department's response was predictable. They doubled down, defending their officers and citing crime statistics that had been carefully manipulated to support their narrative. "This case represents everything wrong with policing in our community," Reverend James Wallace told protesters, unaware that his words were being carefully documented by CIA analysts. "How many more innocent lives must be destroyed before we see change?" The department's public information officer, Lisa Martinez, held press conferences defending the arrest. "The evidence is clear," she stated firmly. "Our officers followed proper procedure and made an arrest based on solid probable cause." Behind the scenes, Rodriguez, posing as Marcus's public defender, filed routine motions and paperwork, maintaining the appearance of a standard criminal defense. His requests for bodycam footage and arrest reports were met with delays and excuses, all of which were carefully noted for the coming revelation. "Channel 4 wants an exclusive interview with you," Chen informed Marcus during their daily briefing. "They're painting you as a criminal mastermind who used his business success as a cover." Marcus smiled, declined politely. Let them keep building their fictional narrative. The case had become a Rorschach test for the community. Some saw it as proof of effective policing, while others recognized it as blatant racial profiling. News vans became a permanent fixture outside the courthouse, waiting for any development in what they believed would be a routine preliminary hearing. Officer Sullivan appeared on the evening news again, this time with his family. "We're just doing our jobs," he said, his wife nodding supportively beside him. "Criminals come in all forms, and we have to remain vigilant." As the day of the preliminary hearing approached, the media circus grew. No one suspected that the real show was yet to come, that every interview and public statement was another piece of evidence in a much larger case. The officers who thought they were enjoying their moment of fame were actually participating in their own undoing. Marcus watched it all unfold with the patience of a seasoned operative, knowing that sometimes the best strategy was to let your opponents believe they were winning, right up until the moment of their complete defeat. 3 days before the preliminary hearing, the CIA's Secure Operations Room buzzed with focused activity. Multiple screens displayed surveillance footage, financial records, and police department internal communications. Director Chen stood at the center, coordinating what had become one of the agency's most sophisticated domestic operations. "We've got something bigger," Agent Rodriguez announced, entering with a stack of files. "Remember those missing items from previous arrests? We traced them." Marcus studied the financial records displayed on screen. They got sloppy. All the sales happened within days of the arrests, and the money went into offshore accounts they thought couldn't be traced. The evidence wall had grown impressive. Photos of previous victims were connected with red string to arrest reports, showing a clear pattern. Each case involved a professional black person driving an expensive car through wealthy neighborhoods. The planted evidence was always similar, small items that could be easily concealed and later sold. The cellular data is interesting, a tech analyst pointed out. Sullivan and Barrett's phones pinged near these pawn shops exactly when the stolen items were sold. They'd always used the same route, always during their patrol hours. Meanwhile, the officers remained confident. They had no idea that their recent media appearances were being analyzed by behavioral experts, who noted their growing arrogance and increasingly bold statements about cleaning up the streets. "Look at this," Chen said, playing a clip from their latest interview. "They're actually bragging about how they can spot suspicious characters just by looking at them." Every word reinforces the racial profiling aspect of our case. The operation had expanded beyond just two corrupt officers. Internal Affairs, working closely with the CIA, had identified a network of complicit department members who had helped cover up previous complaints. Bank records showed suspicious deposits. Text messages revealed coded communications about targeting specific neighborhoods. "We've interviewed 12 of their previous victims," Rodriguez reported. "Each story is nearly identical. Traffic stops without cause, planted evidence, forced confessions. Some lost their jobs. 2 lost their homes paying legal fees. 1 victim's marriage fell apart under the stress." Marcus felt a deep responsibility to these people. His case would not only expose the corruption but would help restore their reputations and potentially lead to compensation for their losses. The evidence room at the police department had been secretly photographed by undercover agents. They discovered a pattern of evidence tampering extending back years. Items were logged in but never made it to storage. Documentation was altered to hide discrepancies. Their captain had to know, Chen concluded, reviewing personnel files. These patterns are too obvious to miss during routine audits. Local FBI agents, coordinating with the CIA, had placed surveillance on the pawn shops. They photographed other officers from the department visiting these same locations, suggesting the corruption network was wider than initially suspected. "Tomorrow's newspaper will run another story praising their arrest record," Rodriguez informed the team. Sullivan gave them what he calls tips for spotting criminals in affluent areas. It's basically a manual for racial profiling. The department's internal messaging system, accessed through a confidential informant, revealed discussions about Marcus's case. Officers openly discussed how to ensure a conviction, sharing techniques for making planted evidence appear more convincing in court. "They're planning to enhance their testimony," Marcus noted, reading the messages, "adding details about suspicious behavior that never happened. They think it will make the case stronger." Chen smiled grimly. "Let them. Every embellishment, every lie under oath, will only make the revelation more dramatic." As evening approached, the team reviewed their strategy one final time. Every piece of evidence was cataloged and verified. Multiple backups were secured in different locations. The preliminary hearing would start like any other, with the officers confidently presenting their fabricated case. "Everything's in place," Chen confirmed, closing the final file. "When this breaks, it won't just expose 2 corrupt officers. It will reveal systemic racism, organized crime operating under the badge, and a department-wide culture of discrimination." Marcus stood at the window, watching the sunset over Virginia. In 3 days, everything would change. The officers who thought they were bringing down a successful black businessman would instead become the catalyst for their department's complete reformation. "They never imagined," he said quietly, "that their perfect target would turn out to be their worst nightmare." The Alexandria County Courthouse buzzed with activity on the morning of the preliminary hearing. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the clear autumn sky. Inside courtroom 3B, Officers Sullivan and Barrett sat confidently behind the prosecutor's table, occasionally exchanging knowing glances. Marcus Johnson entered wearing a perfectly tailored Navy suit, accompanied by Rodriguez, still playing the role of a public defender. They took their seats at the defense table, maintaining the appearance of a routine hearing. In the gallery, Director Chen sat inconspicuously among the spectators, dressed as a court reporter. Judge Maria Hernandez entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The prosecutor, David Wells, stood with practiced authority, ready to present what he believed was a straightforward case of burglary and possession of stolen property. Your Honor, Wells began, the state will prove that on the night in question, Officers Sullivan and Barrett apprehended the defendant with clear evidence linking him to a series of high-end burglaries in the Belhaven area. Sullivan was the first to take the stand. He recounted the traffic stop with rehearsed precision, describing how they had followed proper procedure and discovered stolen jewelry in Marcus's car. His testimony was confident, detailed, and completely false. The suspect's behavior was immediately suspicious, Sullivan testified. The way he was driving slowly through the neighborhood, his nervous demeanor when we approached the vehicle. These are telltale signs we're trained to recognize. Barrett followed, corroborating his partner's account and adding embellishments about Marcus's supposed suspicious behavior. Neither officer noticed Rodriguez's subtle smile as they perjured themselves under oath. And you discovered the stolen items during a routine search of the vehicle? Wells asked Barrett. Yes, sir, Barrett replied. The jewelry bag was partially visible under the passenger seat. It matched the description of items taken from recent burglaries in the area. The prosecutor presented the planted evidence in sealed bags, along with photographs from the arrest scene. Judge Hernandez examined them carefully while Marcus maintained a composed expression. During cross-examination, Rodriguez asked only basic questions, appearing almost disinterested. This seeming lack of defense strategy made the officers even more confident. They had no idea they were being led into a carefully laid trap. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor, Rodriguez said, sitting down. The officers exchanged triumphant looks, believing their testimony had gone unchallenged. Then came the moment that would change everything. Your Honor, Rodriguez stood again, his demeanor suddenly transformed. The defense would like to call a rebuttal witness. Director Sarah Chen of the Central Intelligence Agency. The courtroom fell silent. Sullivan and Barrett's faces froze in confusion as Chen rose from her seat and walked to the witness stand. Judge Hernandez, caught off guard but maintaining her composure, swore her in. Director Chen, Rodriguez began, could you please explain to the court who Marcus Johnson is? Chen's voice carried authority through the stunned courtroom. Marcus Johnson is a senior CIA operative with 15 years of service. On the night in question, he was conducting authorized surveillance as part of an ongoing national security operation. The color drained from the officers' faces. The prosecutor dropped his pen, suddenly realizing he had been pursuing charges against a federal agent. Furthermore, Chen continued, Mr. Johnson's vehicle was equipped with multiple surveillance devices as part of standard CIA protocol. We have complete audio and video documentation of the entire encounter. Rodriguez approached the bench with a tablet. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, the vehicle's surveillance footage showing Officers Sullivan and Barrett planting evidence during their search. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the judge called for order. The officers sat rigid in their seats, watching their carefully constructed case collapse around them. Their previous confidence had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that they had unknowingly targeted a CIA operative and lied about it under oath. As the surveillance footage began to play on the courtroom screens, showing the clear evidence of police misconduct, Barrett leaned over to Sullivan and whispered, We're finished. The hearing that was supposed to be their moment of triumph had turned into the beginning of their downfall, and they still didn't know that this was just the opening act of a much larger exposure of departmental corruption. The courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically as Rodriguez presented evidence after damning evidence. The surveillance footage showed the officers not only planting evidence but making racist remarks during the arrest. Your Honor, Rodriguez continued, we also have satellite tracking data confirming Mr. Johnson's exact location and movements that night. He projected a detailed map showing Marcus's car following the suspected foreign agent, complete with timestamps that matched his mission logs. Sullivan and Barrett sat slumped in their chairs as their careers crumbled before their eyes. The prosecutor, David Wells, looked equally stunned, realizing he had been manipulated into pursuing false charges against a federal agent. But there's more, Rodriguez announced. Director Chen, Could you explain what else the CIA uncovered during this investigation? Chen approached a digital display board. During our investigation of this incident, we discovered a pattern of similar arrests by these officers. She began displaying photographs and documents. Over the past 3 years, they have targeted 15 professional black individuals in affluent neighborhoods using the same methods. The judge leaned forward, her expression severe. Are you suggesting this was part of a larger operation? Yes, Your Honor, Chen replied. We have evidence linking Officers Sullivan and Barrett to a sophisticated theft ring. The items they claimed to find during these arrests were later sold through a network of pawn shops in Maryland. Federal agents entered the courtroom, taking positions near the exits. Rodriguez projected bank records showing suspicious deposits into offshore accounts tied to the officers. Each victim's story follows the same pattern, Rodriguez explained, displaying a timeline. A traffic stop without cause, planted evidence, and arrests that led to career devastation for innocent people. One of the previous victims, Dr. James Wilson, a prominent surgeon who had lost his hospital privileges after his arrest, stood up in the gallery. Those officers destroyed my life, he called out, his voice trembling with emotion. I lost everything defending myself against their lies. Judge Hernandez had seen enough. Officers Sullivan and Barrett, you are hereby detained pending federal charges. Bailiff, take them into custody. As the officers were being handcuffed, the courthouse doors opened again. FBI Special Agent Catherine Martinez entered with another team of agents. Your Honor, we have arrest warrants for 6 other members of the Alexandria Police Department who were complicit in this scheme. The revelation of the larger conspiracy sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Photos appeared on screen showing other officers visiting the same pawn shops, text messages revealing their coordination, and evidence room logs showing systematic theft. Captain Thomas Reynolds, who had approved all the fraudulent arrests, tried to slip out of the courtroom, but found his path blocked by federal agents. His face showed the same shock that Sullivan and Barrett had displayed earlier, the realization that their entire corrupt system had been exposed. Marcus finally stood, addressing the court for the first time. Your Honor, this case is about more than just my arrest. It's about a systemic abuse of power that has devastated countless lives. These officers didn't just violate their badges, they betrayed the very community they swore to protect. Director Chen presented the final piece of evidence, internal department communications showing a deliberate strategy of targeting minority professionals. This was no accident, she explained. It was a calculated effort to maintain racial barriers in affluent neighborhoods through intimidation and false arrests. Judge Hernandez's voice cut through the chaos. This court is appalled by the level of corruption and racial discrimination revealed today. All charges against Mr. Johnson are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a full federal investigation into the Alexandria Police Department. As Sullivan and Barrett were led away in handcuffs, their former colleagues watched in stunned silence. The officers who had arrived to testify in support of their hero partners now faced their own reckonings. The media frenzy outside the courthouse had grown as word of the revelations spread. Reporters who had previously praised the officers' successful arrest now scrambled to cover the largest police corruption scandal in Virginia's history. Marcus stood with Director Chen and Rodriguez, watching the officers being escorted to federal vehicles. Their strategic patience had paid off, exposing not just 2 corrupt officers, but an entire system of institutionalized racism and criminal behavior. Sometimes, Marcus said quietly, justice requires letting your opponents think they're winning, right up until the moment they lose everything. 1 month after the explosive courtroom revelation, the impact continued to ripple through the justice system and community. The Alexandria Police Department underwent a complete transformation as federal investigators uncovered decades of systematic discrimination and corruption. Officers Sullivan and Barrett had already accepted plea deals, agreeing to testify against higher-ranking officials in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimonies revealed a deeply entrenched system of targeting minority professionals, with profits from stolen evidence split among corrupt officers and supervisors. Marcus Johnson sat in Director Chen's office, reviewing the latest developments. On her screen, news coverage showed former Captain Reynolds being led into federal court. The investigation had traced over $2 million in stolen property through his network of pawn shops. The recovery process has begun, Chen reported, sliding a folder across her desk. Every victim of their false arrests will have their records expunged. The federal government is establishing a compensation fund for those who suffered financial losses. Dr. James Wilson, the surgeon who had lost his career, had been fully reinstated at his hospital with back pay. Other victims were receiving similar vindication, their professional reputations restored along with financial compensation for their losses. The Alexandria Times, which had once celebrated Sullivan and Barrett's arrests, now ran a front-page series titled Badge of Dishonor, exposing how racial profiling had become institutionalized within the department. Reporter Sarah Martinez, who had written the original story praising the officers, published a powerful apology to the community. The most significant change, Marcus noted, reviewing community statistics, is in the department itself. The Alexandria PD was under new leadership, with reformed policies and mandatory bias training. Traffic stop data showed dramatic changes in enforcement patterns, with no racial disparities in the month since the scandal broke. In the courthouse where the truth had exploded, Judge Hernandez presided over a special hearing. Dozens of previously convicted individuals had their cases reviewed, with many convictions overturned due to evidence of officer misconduct. The system failed these citizens, Hernandez declared, but today we begin to make it right. Her courtroom, once the scene of injustice, had become a place of redemption. The FBI's investigation expanded to neighboring departments, checking for similar patterns of abuse. 3 other jurisdictions had already requested federal oversight to review their practices and implement reforms. Marcus's role had evolved too. The CIA assigned him to assist in developing new training programs for law enforcement agencies nationwide, focusing on eliminating bias and corruption. His experience had become a powerful teaching tool. "Your case changed everything," Rodriguez told him during a planning meeting. "It showed how technology and patience can expose even the most entrenched corruption." In Belhaven, where the incident began, community meetings brought residents and police together for honest discussions about race and law enforcement. The wealthy neighborhood that had once been a hunting ground for corrupt officers became a model for community policing reform. Former Officer Sullivan, now in federal custody, requested a meeting with Marcus. In a monitored conversation, he expressed remorse not just for the false arrest, but for years of targeting innocent people. "We thought we were untouchable," he admitted. "Your case showed us how wrong we were." The pawn shop network that had fenced stolen evidence was dismantled. Its owners faced federal charges, and recovered items were being returned to their rightful owners. The offshore accounts used to hide illegal profits were frozen, their contents seized for victim restitution. Director Chen received congressional approval for a new initiative combining federal and local resources to prevent similar corruption schemes. "The lesson here," she testified before a Senate committee, "is that no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it." As Marcus drove home that evening, passing through the same Belhaven streets where it all began, he reflected on how one incident of racial profiling had exposed and dismantled an entire system of corruption. His dashboard camera still recorded every drive, not just for security now, but as a reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, was always watching. The story of the CIA agent who exposed police corruption became more than just headlines. It became a catalyst for real change, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon against systemic racism isn't force or fury, but patience and precision in revealing the truth.